Every person in your life is not assigned to your destiny. That truth can be hard to accept, especially when emotions are involved. But it is one of the clearest lessons God teaches through the journey of faith. We often hold on to people out of habit, comfort, or history, but God deals with people based on purpose. And when a person's presence no longer serves His divine plan for your life, He will allow or even cause that relationship to shift, fade, or end altogether. God is intentional. He does not randomly orchestrate your steps. He orders them with a plan in mind. And part of that plan includes the people who walk alongside you. But if someone no longer aligns with your direction, God will intervene. That doesn't always mean the person is bad. It just means they're no longer right for where you're going. Some divine. There's a difference between people who helped you build and those who are meant to help you go further. Just because someone was necessary in one season doesn't mean they're needed in the next. In the story of Abraham, God told him in Genesis 12, "Go from your country, your people, and your father's household to the land I will show you." Notice the instruction. Leave your familiar place and your familiar people. Why? Because the fulfillment of the promise God was making required separation from the past. God wasn't just relocating Abraham's body. He was shifting his future. And that shift meant leaving behind those who weren't part of the covenant journey. Yet even Abraham brought Lot along. Lot wasn't part of God's original instruction, but Abraham took him anyway. As time went on, the land couldn't support them both, and conflict broke out between their herdsmen. It wasn't until Lot separated from Abraham that God finally revealed the full extent of the promise. That's not a coincidence. Some promises are postponed because the wrong people are present. When the wrong people are in your life, they don't just cause conflict, they cloud clarity. You can't see clearly when your surroundings are filled with voices that don't carry your vision. You can't discern divine direction when your space is occupied by people God never co-signed. That's why He sometimes forces separation. He will let tension rise, allow relationships to shift, and open your eyes to see the difference between those who love you for who you are and those who cling to you for what they get. It's important to remember that God's removals are often acts of mercy. He sees what you can't. He hears conversations you're not in. He knows motives before they manifest. And because He's protecting your purpose, He will step in and remove people who could eventually derail your destiny. You may not understand it now. You may cry, question, or even resist it. But time will show you that every divine removal made room for something greater. This is especially true when we look at Jesus' own ministry. Not everyone who followed Him was committed to Him. He had crowds, but He trusted few. When He prepared to enter the most critical part of His mission, He didn't take everyone. He took Peter, James, and John, and even among them, He had to correct, refine, and challenge their thinking. Just imagine if He had let the entire crowd into Gethsemane. The wrong people in the right place can still create the wrong atmosphere. God will never ask you to let go without having something greater prepared. He never subtracts without the intention to add something better in line with His will. So when people exit your life, unexpectedly, painfully, or even confusingly, know this: their departure may be the very thing that unlocks your next level. Not because they were evil, but because their part in your story is finished. And when the author writes a new chapter, he turns the page. Just because someone is around you doesn't mean they're aligned with your calling. One of the most deceptive traps the enemy sets for believers is making them believe that the quantity of connections is more valuable than the quality of alignment. But in God's kingdom, alignment always trumps association. Some people are present in your life, but not positioned by God. They may look like supporters, sound like encouragers, and even act like friends, but if their heart, spirit, and purpose don't line up with God's will for your journey, their presence can become a distraction instead of a blessing. In the natural, something divine, we wouldn't keep tools that don't fit the job we're trying to do. We wouldn't use a screwdriver to hammer a nail, and we wouldn't put diesel in a gas engine. So why do we keep trying to force certain people into places they were never designed to fit? When someone isn't aligned with your calling, they can slow your momentum, distort your focus, and even contaminate your faith. Their intentions may not even be malicious. They might be well-meaning, but still misplaced. The danger is not always in overt opposition. Sometimes it's in subtle misalignment. Let's consider the story of Saul and David. Saul was the king, but David was the anointed. There came a time when David served in Saul's court, played the harp for him, and fought battles for him. He was around Saul, but Saul was not aligned with God's future for David. In fact, as David's calling became clearer, Saul's jealousy intensified. Saul tolerated David's presence only as long as David didn't outshine him. But the moment David's purpose began to surface, Saul saw him as a threat. That's how you can tell the difference between people who are aligned with you and people who are merely around you. Those who are aligned will celebrate your growth. Those who are merely around will compete with it. Aligned people push you closer to God's vision for your life. Misaligned people pull you back into insecurity, confusion, and compromise. Jesus also made a clear distinction between crowds and disciples. The multitudes followed him, but only a few walked with him in truth. And even among the 12, not all were aligned with his mission. Judas was around, but not aligned. Peter was aligned, but sometimes off track. Alignment doesn't mean perfection. It means shared purpose. Jesus knew who was with him and who was just near him. He didn't chase the crowd, and he didn't confuse company with covenant. In your own life, it's crucial to evaluate your connections through a spiritual lens. Ask yourself, is this person building my faith or draining it? Are they walking with me in purpose or just enjoying proximity? Because proximity is not proof of partnership. Some people are only around you because of what they can receive, not what they're called to contribute. And if you're not discerning, you'll confuse convenience with covenant and end up yoked to someone who was never meant to walk the distance with you. God is a God of order, and he doesn't attach you to people by accident. When he wants to move you forward, he places the right people in position, those who speak life, challenge your stagnation, and help carry the weight of your assignment. But when you surround yourself with people who are out of sync with your direction, you'll find yourself constantly drained, distracted, and divided. You don't need everyone. You need the right ones. Those who are aligned with your calling will not only stay, they'll stretch with you, sacrifice with you, and serve God beside you. Because alignment isn't about agreeing in personality, it's about agreement in purpose. When alignment is right, movement becomes easier, clarity becomes sharper, and God's hand becomes evident every step you take. God will subtract people to multiply purpose. That's a truth we don't always embrace right away. Because subtraction doesn't feel like progress. It feels like loss. It feels like confusion. It feels like things are falling apart. But in God's economy, what looks like decrease is often the groundwork for increase. His kingdom doesn't operate by human logic. He removes what's comfortable in order to make space for what's necessary. What you perceive as being left behind might actually be God clearing the room so you can finally breathe, move, and grow into who you're called to be. We often equate more with better. More friends, more followers, more connections. More means success. But God sees deeper than appearances. He's not impressed by numbers. He's committed to purpose. When Jesus was surrounded by thousands, he still chose to pour his deepest teaching into 12. And even among those 12, he had 3 in his inner circle. Why? Because not everyone has the capacity to walk with you on the path to purpose. Some are not mature enough. Some are not spiritually aligned. And some simply cannot handle the weight of your assignment. God's subtractions are not random. They're strategic. Just like a skilled gardener prunes a plant, God will prune your relationships. Pruning is painful, but it's never wasted. A branch is not cut because it's useless. It's cut because its current growth pattern is limiting the full potential of the plant. Likewise, God will remove people, not because you or they are worthless, but because your growth requires more space, more focus, or a new direction they're not equipped to travel. Consider the story of Gideon in Judges 7. Gideon started with 32,000 men ready to go into battle. But God said, "You have too many now to us." That sounds strange. How can you have too many warriors going into war? But God was teaching a principle. When victory comes, he wants there to be no confusion about the source. So he cut the army down to 300. Not because Gideon needed fewer soldiers, but because Gideon needed greater dependence. The subtraction created a deeper trust, and the trust positioned him for supernatural victory. Sometimes God subtracts people to strip away pride. Sometimes he subtracts to break our dependency on man's approval. Sometimes he subtracts to protect us from toxic influence of future harm we can't see yet. And sometimes he subtracts because the journey ahead requires a lighter load. You can't climb a mountain dragging everyone from the valley. That doesn't mean you don't love them. It means you understand the assignment requires a different weight class of faith and focus. Even in the life of Abraham, there came a moment when he had to separate from Lot. They had grown too large to coexist in the same space. The separation wasn't hostile, it was necessary. And it was only after Lot departed that God gave Abraham a clearer view of the promise. The vision was delayed, not because of Abraham's disobedience, but because there were still attachments clouding his clarity. Once the separation happened, the revelation came. That's the power of divine subtraction. It clarifies, it purifies, and it prepares. It removes what's no longer aligned so God can position what is. The pain of loss is real, but the fruit of obedience is greater. If you trust him through the subtraction, he will bring multiplication, not just in quantity, but in impact, depth, peace, and purpose. So don't panic when people start leaving, when circles shift, or when relationships end. Ask God what he's doing in the movement. Sometimes, the subtraction is not about who left, but about what's coming. You're not being emptied, you're being positioned for overflow. And when the right people are in place and the wrong ones are removed, purpose will flow like never before. Don't mourn closed doors that God shut to protect your future. One of the greatest sources of delayed growth in the life of a believer is our tendency to grieve what God has already removed. We replay the conversations, we hold on to the memories, and we try to force something to stay alive that God has already called finished. And while it's natural to feel the sting of separation, it's dangerous to confuse your emotions with divine direction. Just because something felt good doesn't mean it was good for your destiny. And just because you wanted it doesn't mean God assigned it. We often pray for God to open doors, but we must remember that the same God who opens doors also closes them. And both actions are acts of love. When God shuts a door, it's not because he's punishing you. It's because he's protecting you. He sees what you cannot. He knows what waits on the other side of the relationship, the opportunity, or the connection you thought you needed. You saw comfort. He saw compromise. He saw companionship. He saw a future that would derail your purpose. So in his mercy, he shut the door. Look at how God moved in the life of the Israelites during their exodus from Egypt. After they left bondage, they approached the Red Sea, with Pharaoh's army closing in behind them. God parted the sea and brought them through safely. But then he did something critical. He closed the sea. He shut the path that could have allowed Egypt to follow them. He made it clear that the past would not have access to their future. The closing wasn't just about escape. It was about separation. He was saying, what I delivered you from will not be able to reach you again. Yet how often do we, like the Israelites, get delivered and still long for Egypt? We miss the familiarity of what we once had, forgetting that what was familiar was also enslaving. We romanticize what God removed because we forget how broken we were while we were in it. Something divine. That's why you can't trust your feelings over God's decisions. He closes doors not based on your comfort, but on your calling. And your calling is too valuable to be compromised by people or situations that can't go where you're going. Sometimes God's close come through betrayal. Other times through unanswered prayers. Sometimes he doesn't even give you an explanation. He just removes the person, shuts the connection down, and blocks the path. And in the moment, it feels painful and confusing. But if you wait on the Lord and trust his timing, you'll look back and thank him for every no, every delay, and every door he bolted shut. In the story of Samuel and Saul, when God rejected Saul as king, Samuel mourned. He cried, grieved, and wrestled with the fact that someone he had invested in was no longer part of God's plan. But then God came to Samuel and asked, how long will you mourn for Saul, seeing I have rejected him? In other words, why are you still crying over what I have already concluded? God had already moved on, but Samuel was still stuck in sorrow. That's where many of us live, mourning something that heaven has already labeled as over. It's not that your grief is invalid, it's that your focus has to shift. At some point, you must stop staring at the closed door and start looking for the next open one. God won't leave you in loss without preparing something greater on the other side. But you won't see it if your eyes are still fixed on what used to be. Let God be God. Trust that he knows better than you. If he closed the door, let it stay closed. Don't pry it open with your emotions. Don't break it down with your desperation. What God has shut, no man can open. And if he shut it, he did it for your good. When you stop mourning what he removed, you'll finally be free to walk in what he's prepared. When Judas left, Jesus let him go. That moment in Scripture is not just about betrayal, it's about clarity. Jesus knew who Judas was, something divine, what he was planning and why he was there. And yet, when Judas got up from the table to go and do what was in his heart, Jesus didn't stop him. He didn't beg him to stay. He didn't chase him down. He simply said, what you are about to do quickly. That's not bitterness. That's discernment. That's divine focus. Jesus understood that not everyone who walks with you is meant to finish with you. And sometimes the best thing you can do is let them go. Too often we waste emotional energy trying to hold on to people God is trying to remove. We confuse loyalty with wisdom. We hold on to history even when the spiritual fruit is rotten. But walking in purpose requires you to recognize when a person's season in your life has ended. Just because someone started the journey with you doesn't mean they're equipped to complete it with you. And when they show signs that their heart is no longer aligned with your calling, don't ignore the red flags. Even Jesus, full of grace and truth, didn't fight Judas's departure. Some exits are divine. They don't always come with closure, clarity, or clean edges. Sometimes they leave you with questions, but those questions don't need answers if you trust that God is doing the editing. Judas was necessary, but only to a point. He played a role in the larger story, but he was not part of the resurrection. He was there for the betrayal, not for the breakthrough. And Jesus didn't try to write Judas into the rest of the narrative. He allowed the story to move forward without him. That's a powerful lesson. Not everyone in your life is meant to be permanent. Some are just there to serve a temporary function. Maybe they helped build a foundation, opened a door, or revealed something in you that needed healing. And once that purpose is fulfilled, their departure isn't a tragedy. It's timing. Holding on to people past their expiration date will contaminate your peace. And if you keep feeding a connection God has starved, you'll delay your own growth. We often think that letting someone go is an act of failure. But in the kingdom, it can be an act of faith. It's saying, God, I trust you more than I trust my feelings. It's releasing your grip on what's familiar and opening your hands to what's next. When you let go of who God has released, you make space for who he's sending. But as long as you chase Judas, you'll miss the Peters. Those who, despite their mistakes, are called to walk with you into restoration. Jesus never allowed the betrayal of one to stop the purpose of all. He didn't fall apart when Judas walked out. He moved forward. He went to the garden. He prayed. He submitted to the Father's will. He stayed on mission. And that's what you must do. When someone exits your life, especially if they were close, don't lose your identity. Don't abandon your purpose. Stay rooted in who you are and where God is taking you. Letting someone go doesn't mean you hate them. It means you honor the assignment God has placed on your life. It means you're more committed to your destiny than your discomfort. It means you understand that peace is sometimes found on the other side of goodbye. And when the wrong person walks out, you can lift your hands not in defeat, but in freedom, because if Jesus let Judas go, so can you. There are some blessings God won't release until certain people are removed from your life. Not because he's withholding, but because his blessing is too valuable to be exposed to the wrong atmosphere. God is not careless with his glory. He doesn't pour out destiny where there's division, jealousy, or compromise. He protects his plans by preparing the environment first. And part of that preparation is purging the space of people who don't honor what he's doing in you. You may be ready for the blessing, but if the people around you aren't aligned, God will wait. Because what he wants to give you must be stewarded in the right company. Sometimes we cry out to God asking, Lord, why hasn't the breakthrough come yet? Why is the door still shut? But the delay isn't always about your readiness. It's about your relationships. God can see who's clapping in public and competing in private. He sees who's silently rooting for your failure while pretending to support your success. And because he loves you too much to bless you in the presence of people who will mishandle or manipulate what he gives, he waits until the wrong ones are gone. Think about how God worked with Abraham in Genesis. When God first called Abraham, he gave him a promise to make him into a great nation. But the full weight of that promise didn't unfold until Lot separated from him. Lot wasn't evil, but he wasn't destined to inherit the same covenant. As long as Lot was close, the next stage of Abram's journey was delayed. But once separation came, revelation followed. That's not coincidence. That's kingdom principle. Separation often precedes elevation. God cleans the room before he enters with glory. Jesus himself operated by this standard. When he entered the home of Jairus to raise his daughter from the dead, he put the crowd out. Why? Because their doubt and disbelief didn't match the miracle he was about to perform. He didn't invite everyone into that sacred moment. He surrounded himself with those who believed, who were aligned, and who could carry the weight of what was about to happen. If Jesus was selective about who witnessed his miracles, why would we think we can carry ours into every circle? There are moments in your life that are so pivotal, so sacred, that not everyone can be present for them. God is strategic about who's in the room when he blesses you. He'll allow doors to close, relationships to fade, and opportunities to shift, not to punish you, but to prepare the environment. When the wrong people are around, the right blessing may be held back. Not because God changed his mind, but because the setting isn't secure. Something device. Sometimes we don't even realize how much certain people are hindering us until they're gone. Only after they leave does our prayer life deepen, our focus sharpen, our creativity return. That's not just emotional release. That's spiritual realignment. Their presence was disrupting your flow. And God, in his mercy, stepped in and did what you were too loyal or too afraid to do. He removed the distraction so he could release the destiny. We must be mature enough to discern when a relationship is an assignment from God and when it's a distraction from the enemy. One lifts you, the other limits you. One stretches you, the other suffocates you. And if you're not careful, you'll forfeit God's best trying to keep someone who was never meant to stay. But if you trust him through the discomfort of divine disconnection, you'll discover a peace that doesn't come from people. It comes from alignment. And once you're aligned, the blessing won't just come. It will overflow, not just for you, but for everyone assigned to your next season.